In the summer of 1969, a river in Cleveland caught fire. That sentence sounds impossible, almost like a myth invented to describe pollution in the most dramatic way possible. But the Cuyahoga River had become so contaminated with oil, solvents, sewage, and industrial waste that floating debris could ignite. The June fire was not the largest fire on the river, and it was put out quickly, yet it became the one people remembered. It arrived at a moment when Americans were starting to look at dirty air and water differently. The burning river became a symbol because it made an invisible problem visible. If a river could burn, then normal industry had crossed into something deeply unnatural.
The Cuyahoga did not become dangerous overnight. Cleveland grew as a manufacturing city, and the river served as a working artery for ships, mills, refineries, rail yards, and factories. For decades, waterways were treated as convenient drains. Waste that would be expensive to handle on land could be pushed into the current and forgotten downstream. Oil-coated surfaces, chemical residues mixed with sewage, sludge gathered along banks and beneath docks. People knew the river was filthy, but pollution had been folded into the price of progress. Jobs, steel, transport, and growth seemed to justify a river that smelled bad, looked bad, and sometimes behaved like fuel.
River fires had happened before. The Cuyahoga burned in the 19th century, again in the early 20th century, and in major episodes before 1969. Some earlier fires caused more damage than the famous one. Bridges, boats, and waterfront structures were threatened or destroyed. Yet each fire was often treated as a local industrial accident rather than a national warning. That reaction matters. Disasters can repeat for years when society sees them as isolated events. The Cuyahoga kept telling the same story in flames, but the political language to respond was still weak. The river was not a mystery. It was evidence that had been ignored until the evidence became embarrassing.
By 1969, the United States was changing. Television, magazines, and newspapers could spread shocking images and stories quickly. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring had helped expand public awareness of chemical harm. Cities were choking on smog. Beaches and lakes were showing the cost of untreated sewage and industrial dumping. Lake Erie, downstream from the Cuyahoga system, was often described as dying. Against that background, the burning river became more than a Cleveland problem. It became proof that the environment was not an endless sink. The fire worked as a headline because everyone understood water was supposed to extinguish fire, not carry it.
The famous coverage also contained a strange detail. Some widely circulated images associated with the Cuyahoga fire were not photographs of the 1969 blaze itself, because that fire was brief and not heavily photographed. Older photographs and broader pollution images helped shape public memory. That does not make the event fake. It makes it a lesson in how symbols are built. The real fire mattered, but so did decades of accumulated disgust, fear, and anger. People did not need a perfect photograph to understand the truth. The river had burned, the water was contaminated, and the industrial system had failed to protect a public resource.
The science behind the danger was straightforward and brutal. Oil and petroleum products float. Industrial solvents and organic waste can create flammable films or feed intense contamination. Sewage reduces oxygen and changes aquatic life. Heavy metals and toxic compounds settle into sediments where they can persist long after visible slicks disappear. A working river can look like a machine, but it is still an ecosystem. Fish, insects, plants, birds, and people all depend on chemistry that remains within livable limits. The Cuyahoga showed what happens when a river is expected to absorb everything and still function as if nothing happened.
Public pressure after the late 1960s helped reshape American law. The first Earth Day came in 1970. The Environmental Protection Agency was created the same year. The Clean Water Act followed in 1972, setting stronger federal standards and changing how pollution could be regulated. The burning river was not the only cause of these changes, but it became one of the unforgettable images behind them. It helped make pollution feel like a national moral issue rather than a local nuisance. A river was not just property beside factories. It was part of the shared life of a city and a country.
The recovery was not instant. Cleaning an industrial river requires money, monitoring, enforcement,
infrastructure, and patience. Sewage systems have to improve. Factories have to change practices. Contaminated sediments have to be managed. Communities have to decide that a river is worth more alive than dead. Over time, parts of the Cuyahoga improved dramatically. Wildlife returned to stretches where survival had once seemed unlikely. Recreation, parks, and restoration projects changed how people related to the water. The transformation is important because it prevents the story from becoming only a tale of failure. It shows that damage can be reduced when denial ends.
But the story also warns against easy memory. It is tempting to look back at burning rivers as a problem of the past, from a dirtier and less careful era. Yet water pollution has not disappeared. New chemicals, plastic waste, agricultural runoff, aging pipes, and unequal enforcement still threaten rivers around the world. The Cuyahoga became famous because its crisis was spectacular. Many modern water crises are quieter. They appear as unsafe wells, algal blooms, poisoned sediments, or communities told not to drink what comes from the tap. The lesson is not that one river burned once. The lesson is that pollution becomes normal when people with power do not have to live with its consequences.
The Cuyahoga River fire remains disturbing because it reversed a basic expectation. Water should be the thing that ends fire. In Cleveland, the water itself carried the conditions for flame. That reversal forced people to ask what else had been accepted as normal simply because it was useful, profitable, or familiar. The river did not change America alone, but it gave a movement an image too clear to ignore. A polluted current became a public accusation, and when the flames died down, they left behind a question that still matters. How much damage must become visible before a society decides that the cost of doing nothing is higher than the cost of change?
There is another uncomfortable part of the story. Many residents living near polluted waterways had warned about the danger long before national audiences paid attention. Workers smelled chemicals, families saw oil on the surface, and local newspapers reported fires, fish kills, and ugly conditions. But environmental knowledge is not always respected when it comes from people who have to live beside the problem. The Cuyahoga reminds us that evidence often begins as ordinary testimony. A parent keeping children away from the bank, a fisherman noticing the catch vanish, a doctor seeing respiratory trouble rise, a neighborhood learning that the water near it is treated as disposable. National reform usually looks sudden only because local suffering has been ignored for years.
The river also changed the way Americans imagined government responsibility. Before modern environmental rules, pollution was often handled through weak local enforcement or private complaints that placed the burden on people already harmed. The new approach said that clean water required public standards, monitoring, permits, and penalties. That shift did not make regulators perfect, and it did not end political fights over industry, but it changed the default question. Instead of asking whether a community could prove each injury after the fact, the law began asking whether polluters should be allowed to discharge certain harms in the first place. The burning river helped push that change from outrage into institutions. Seen from today, the most powerful image is not only flame on water, it is the long recovery afterward. Volunteers, scientists, engineers, public officials, and local communities trying to bring life back to a river that had been written off. Restoration is less dramatic than fire, but it is the harder story. It requires years of work after headlines fade. The Cuyahoga's improvement does not erase the damage, and it should not turn the disaster into a comforting myth. It shows that rivers remember what is poured into them, but they can also respond when people finally stop treating them like waste channels. That is why the burning river still matters. It is both a warning and a demand.